All right, so I said that I would put this up for auction if it was done by this Sunday. And we almost have the underpainting done, and I'm really enjoying especially this here and some of these elements. This is not going up for auction this Sunday. I'm gonna give this at least another week. And I'm gonna keep putting up posts so you can watch me create this, but I think it's more fun to do that. What I think we are going to do is that when this is finished, I'm going to have my wife do some visual capture with it. We're going to send it off to the Z-Clay printer that we use, and they make the most high-end, museum quality, archival prints. I mean, the paper's way thick, it's acid neutral, it's one of those things that it's archival, very archival, so the print will not break down over time. When this is finished, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to auction this off, and the starting price will be higher than the other stuff because of the amount of work that went into it. And then I'm going to offer a limited run, very limited, prints of this piece. And those will also be, I don't think I'll auction them off. They'll just be first come, first serve, whoever's looking to get one. I'm going to try to make sure I can do it in a way that it's financially feasible for people. Because I want people to have access, but I also don't want to, spend all my time doing something and not make it worth my while. So I think that's a good way to kill two birds with two stones. Limited edition print. I might actually add a hand-touched element to the prints too, so we'll see. And of course, with the upcoming videos, I'll do a time lapse of the whole thing. And some people really enjoy the long videos, so I'll do the long video as well. Thanks for looking. So right now, I'm just working on some of this, I got some Queen Anne's lace in the front of this piece here. So I'm just blocking in the shapes. Oh, Queen Anne's lace. Made a decision yesterday. I had all day today to paint, and the thought was to simply try to get in and get some of this done in earnest. And I realized that there's no way I'm going to get this done in a fashion that it's going to be ready for tomorrow night. So I decided to take a step back, give it another week, and just take my time and enjoy it. Especially considering I'm going to be offering prints of this piece, limited edition, signed. I felt like for what it is, it deserves more love. It deserves a little bit more attention. So I just, in my heart, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't see it go up before its time. Yeah, I don't think that makes anybody too sad. I genuinely kind of feel people are enjoying watching the process, so no reason to rush that. Right now I'm kind of working on some of these traditional native grasses that we have up here. And I was telling you that I was going to talk about what's going on in the painting and the element at the front. And so what I will tell you is that the farm is wonderful, but the most important part of the farm is not the barn, it's not the field, it's not even the atmosphere and the environment. It is the soil microbiome is the most important part. If my understanding is, and what we're learning about with rotational grazing and regenerative agriculture, and put in whatever tag word you want, but really the case is that if you try to grow vegetables, but you don't grow your soil, inevitably you're doing what's called reductionist agriculture. So you're removing things from the soil and you're not replacing them. And the reason why that's relevant, let's get a piece of Timothy hay here, or my version of it, is that without a good soil microbiome, you will not be growing food for very long. And we know historically that places like the Fertile Crescent, that part of the world used to be abundant and no longer is abundant, no longer yields life because of reductionist agriculture. But if you grow soil, then it doesn't really matter what the byproduct is of that soil. It can be, plants or animals, but you need that element to make the soil healthy, to produce things. And so many farming practices really just focus on the product and they don't care about the soil. This is where we get the idea of modern reductionist market agriculture, where you're just, like it's putting up a warehouse where they're going to stick, thousands of these poor birds that are never going to get sun or actually feel grass beneath their feet. And aside from the fact that I think that's moral garbage to do that, I also think that if you pay attention to nature and you work in harmony with nature, then you get more for what you're looking for than just, drawing out more resources. You can go pick all the wild mushrooms out of a patch, and then next year you won't have any because they couldn't replicate fast enough, or you destroyed the soil, or you destroyed the biome of the mushroom. And as long as people think about things in terms of what they want, not in what the world needs, you're going to run into these problems. I sometimes think there should be a silent chair in the decision-making of all agricultural practices, where you have to imagine you're asking future people what their desires are, because inevitably they inherit the soil and they inherit the damage too. If we're going to save the planet, then I think the first part is you have to focus on the soil. And the reality of soil, and this bothers people, but it's absolutely true, is that people like Alan Savory, who have devoted their life to this work, found the hard way that you can't keep taking off of the soil and have the soil do well. And you can't make the soil better by removing animals. It does not work that way. In fact, that makes the soil worse. What you have to do is you have to work with animals. And the idea is pretty straightforward, is that in reductionist agriculture, you take things out. In regenerative agriculture and rotational grazing, you're putting carbon and nutrients back in, and not in the form of chemicals. Savory figured this out because he was in charge of fixing grasslands and savannas in Africa. And when he started, he was the man in charge. He had done the most schooling, he knew the most about it, and the government said, here, protect the grasslands, stop desertification from happening. Now, if you don't know this, over time, reductionist agriculture, taking out of the soil. Eventually, the soil becomes so poor that nothing grows. And it's not like even the carbon that you're taking out is, if you're not replacing that alone, you're still going to have that problem. So all the material it takes to make the plant, if you grow a plant and pull the plant out, grow a plant, pull the plant out, grow a plant, pull the plant out, you have to think about it like you're taking away bits of soil, bits of nutrients. And not just that, but in the soil, there are bacteria, there are insects, there are all these microbes that are feeding off of the plant material, and they're feeding off of each other. And when you interrupt that, when you fracture that, you're killing the thing that makes the soil viable for life. If you want to not have life on Earth, you just keep doing that, and you will have no life on Earth. And nothing on Earth will stop it. You can switch diets respectfully, and I think it's up to people to choose what they do. And I understand those choices are very hard. Believe me, I get it. But you can't fix it by changing your diet, especially if it involves pulling things out of the soil and moving them long distance. You don't ever want to do that. That's even worse than just depleting the soil. And for all this time, we have been dealing with the problems of soil depletion in the United States and around the world. And this has led to the rise in chemical agriculture. So when the soil stops producing for you the way you want it to, the answer in the 20th century became, we will make a compound, a chemical compound, and just like our healthcare system, we will treat the symptom and not the problem. It's like, here, you can take an aspirin because your head hurts, when it really probably would be a lot better for you to figure out why it is your head hurts in the first place than to just take an aspirin. So, same rules apply here. So you can go with these big companies I won't name, but everybody knows who I would mention, and they're being sued for carcinogens and all these terrible things they have done to the soil. But remember, we asked them to do this because we wanted to be able to have, a tomato that we could ship to market and it would be perfect no matter what. And now you get people like Elliot Coleman out of Maine, who is leading the charge for doing healthy agriculture locally and using double layered plastics and grow tents in the middle of winter in northern Maine to grow food year round. We have options, and we're dealing with the problem, not just the symptom. But Savory takes everything a bit further. He was instructed to fix the savannas. And so the first thing, and you can watch his TED Talk on this, he talks about this. It's really sad. It actually breaks my heart to watch him talk about it because you know what he went through to make this decision, and it's not a fun thing. He was tasked with fixing the soil problem, and while this is going to upset you, it's absolutely true. He applied the science, I've even seen it used now at the moose population in Maine, that the only way to save the savanna would be to wipe out the animals eating it. Because the traditional approach in the scientific world right now is that animals on the landscape cause the landscape to degrade. So Savory used that college level thinking that he had been taught at university, and he applied it. And he came up with a solution, and it was so horrifying to him that he actually went and checked with the government, and he said, look, the solution, as far as I understand it, is we need to cull elephants like it's our job if we want to save the grasslands of Africa. And the government looked at it, and they brought in a team of scientists, and they said, we think you're right, go to it. And he'll have to live with that decision for the rest of his life, because he personally helped them put down over 40,000 elephants. Now, when you're done processing the horror of that event, and that is horrifying, it's just terribly sad. The golden part of this, the part that actually helped and made sense, was that after he saw this, he noticed that the grassland actually didn't do better because of this, it did worse, which is completely opposite to what he understood. So, thankfully, he was smart enough and insightful enough, and he was at one of the savannas just watching the wild animals move across the landscape. And he noticed a interesting thing, was that the animals moving across the landscape were mobbing together to avoid predators. So all the herbivores would mob together to avoid predation. And because they were mobbed together, they would have to keep moving, because they would defecate on their own food, and they're not going to eat their own food. They didn't eat everything. They didn't have an opportunity to eat everything. So instead of eating everything, they found themselves needing to take a bite, move a little bit, which meant they trampled a lot of it. So Savory gets down and he starts looking at the grass, and he noticed something very interesting. Aside from how the animals were moving, he also noticed that when the grass, like this, is covered over, it almost makes like a little protective layer. And the sun hits the top of that grass during the middle of the day, and it's not heating up the soil. It's heating up the dead grass. That means also the moisture that's in that trampled grass stays trapped, so you get like this little layer of cooler air. And so he pulled the grass aside and he put his hand down on the dark soil beneath, and the soil was nice and cool, even in the middle of the hot sun. And then at night, he wanted to see what would change. So he went out and he peeled apart the grass, and he put his hand down in the soil, and the soil was warmer than the surrounding air. In other words, what was happening is, because of this trampling, grazing effect, you had a sort of composting, reseeding effect taking place. Also, the animals, their hooves, ruminators' hooves, evolved in such a way that when they step on grass, they aerate the soil. Unless they stay there long term, they're just aerating the soil, punching holes in the soil, which means that I'm going to try to say mushroom, but I'm going to screw it up. The mycological layer of the soil, which is the fungi that need to be able to break down the dead plants, which need oxygen. The mushrooms function like us. They need to breathe oxygen. If you punch holes in that, just like gardeners do now, you'll aerate the soil, which means that you break it up a little bit, you turn it a little bit, the seeds that are deep downside can kind of come up without destroying the roots of the other grasses. And the mushroom layer was getting fuel. It was getting oxygen. And as they move and as they defecate and urinate, they're also leaving fuel for this microbiome that lives in the soil. So, and they wouldn't come back to the same spot. You couldn't force them over the same spot for months, because the grass and the soil needed time to do their thing. The difference between what we do now and what he observed was that in Western agriculture and reductionist agriculture, we give the grass no rest. We let animals just eat and step and eat. And so they hammer the grass down really badly, and they trample it, and they compact the soil. And then the soil doesn't hold water, and the microbiome doesn't get fed. And the lower they graze it, the less light protection it has. So the light comes down and heats up the soil and kills the microbiome. And then even worse than that is that because there's no soil there, and because the animal didn't defecate there, it didn't trample material, it's actually doing reductionist agriculture itself. It's just consuming it. So the soil becomes weaker every time. And thus that creates our problem that we have now. Or we till the soil. You look into no-till gardening, there's a reason why you wouldn't want to till soil. So Savory looked at this, and then he also realized that because they were overgrazing it, none of the seed heads were making it onto the soil. You couldn't get the seeds to drop in because there weren't any seeds. So all this long hay grass that's growing, those lovely seed heads that eventually form on them, they weren't forming. So they'd get destroyed and the grass wouldn't reseed itself. And people don't understand, like, the grass that's on your prairies, the grass that is out in where we're going to be going, is nothing like New England grass. Like, we're in the Northeast. We don't really know what this is like because we haven't seen this the way it's supposed to be in 500 or 600 years. But the grass out in the plains and in the savannas of Africa, there's different species that evolved to compensate for this because they were being eaten by herbivores and they were benefiting by being, consumed by ruminators. Savory also realized something else. He realized that we didn't have many more ruminators in North America. There's a book by I wish I could remember. Same guy who wrote Coyote America, Daniel. I'll try to put his name in. He talked about how it was actually the introduction of horses from the Spanish that helped the downfall of the bison. But once we didn't have like the land caribou that we are literally, the lower 48's about to lose the caribou. I'm going to get choked up talking about it. But there's less than 46 of them left. There is no hope to bring them back. We are going to lose the lower woodlands caribou in the next 10 years. They will all be extinct forever. They're never coming back. When we lost these ruminators on the landscape, and we lost the ability for ruminators to move freely across landscapes with our developments, not hunting, although market hunting in the 1800s played a huge part in it. Nothing like modern hunting. People don't understand the difference. When we got rid of these animals, the landscape had nothing to massage it or care for it. It simply became a dead zone. And then, of course, you have the Dust Bowl of the 20s, and that's when you destroy the grass that's holding the soil together. You plow it up, it dries out in the sun, and then the wind takes it. 10,000, 40,000 years, 100,000 years of topsoil gone in a matter of 10 years. How ignorant. But if you want to fix it, you have to bring back the elements that created it. And the elements that created it cannot be made with chemicals. You can't fix it with chemicals. In fact, a lot of the places that have had heavy chemicals sprayed on them no longer produce viable microbiome in the soil. There's nothing there to eat anything. So you got fields of GMO corn that are just laying in the dirt, and they've been there for 3 years, and they're not breaking down. That should horrify you. That the alarm bells in your head should be screaming right now, because when you don't have soil, you will no longer have food. And when you don't have food, no one gives a shit. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. So Savory realizes this. He looks at this and he goes, I took animals off this land and killed it. I killed 40,000+ elephants. Every time I say it, my fucking heart breaks. I'm sorry for the language. I can't help myself. It's a very heavy subject. But he had a moment of brilliance. And his moment of brilliance was, what if he did the one thing that he didn't want to do? What if he took the animals he didn't want on the land? Your cattle, your sheep, your domestics, the animals that don't belong in the African savanna for any reason whatsoever. So what if I did blasphemy? What if instead of getting rid of them, what if I actually introduced them and forced them to graze in the exact same pattern as the animals we have or that are diminished? What would happen then? And sure enough, he made progress. And he would give the land time to rest. And of course, depending on the time of year and the amount of rainfall and the cycle of the sun, you would vary how long you'd let an area rest. And lo and behold, the desert disappeared and everything started to cover again with good green growth. In time, he realized he wasn't just doing that Alan Savory had found the goose with the golden eggs, for rather a better way to put it, the magic beans, but they were real. He grew topsoil. He was capturing carbon at a rate that you cannot sequester with any plan that any human being has ever introduced, period. In fact, in ways that we cannot replicate any other way. He brought back soil. He has been trying to share this message with the world since then, and the world doesn't listen. The world doesn't care. Because the world is convinced that reductionist idea is the way to go. In fact, in the West, we are in the middle of an epidemic of thoughtless mindlessness because we believe in reductionism, because we think that the only way to see the world is through reduction science. And I have to be honest with you, science has its place. And reductionism is not always the way you see the world. In fact, if that's the way you choose to see the world, that's the only way you will ever see the world. And systems do not work based on reductionism. Most scientists will tell you, anybody who has a brain in their head, that scientific models do not show us how we understand the world. They show us how poorly we understand recreating models that exist in nature. So, Savory combines this, and he comes up with a variety of techniques. And this is the stuff that Joel Salatin worked with, stacking birds with animals. Salatin uses, at Polyface Farms in Virginia, I almost didn't get that word out at all. He uses chickens, and he'll follow where the cattle or the sheep have been with chicken tractors. And the reason he does this, so you bring in a bunch of chickens and net them off with electric net, and that's another key to how this works, and let the chickens work through the cow patties, all the feces. And the reason for this, and usually Joel delays it, I believe, 2 days, so you get the larvae growth at the highest point. You get flies are about to hatch. If you left your cattle or your sheep in there, they're going to get fly strike, they're going to get infections, they're going to get harassed, they're going to get stressed, and any animal that is sick and stressed is going to perform really poorly. So why do that? Put the animal in new grass. Bring in your chickens. Now, Greg Judy does this, but he does it with barn swallows. So he sets up these swallow nests in the middle of fields, tons of them on poles. And the swallows, whenever the cows are in there, they hammer the insects. They hammer the flies. I think he said one of the swallows could eat 8,000 flies in a day or something crazy like that. They're really high octane. And because of that, disease never gets a chance to get going. Because the animals are not in the same place for very long. It just can't happen. If you believe anything about COVID, then you know that you either get the story of it's in a lab or it's in a wet market. It doesn't matter which one it is. It's either human intervention, it's not. I tend to think it's not wet market. I tend to think it's actually a human intervention, and I think the wet market thing is racist. But you eventually, when you stick that many biological organisms in one area, you're going to get transmission of parasites and changes in the biology of organisms, and eventually you're going to get disease that jumps the barrier and makes other beings sick. It's the same thing. So they move the animals. They move other animals in there with them. So you could use cows to eat a lot of the green forage, but there's a lot of weeds that cows won't eat, but sheep will eat. Then there's really woody stuff that sheep really don't prefer, but goats like it. And then if you need to pull out invasives or plants that are taken over and you want to grow more grasses, you can use pigs to till the soil. He's a guy online, Farm Builder, and he does that technique. And every layer that you add to this, you can make the soil better. You can improve the soil. And that's the point. So doing this process, you end up replacing and growing soil. I think Joel Salatin, since the early 60s, on his farm, Polyface Farms at Polyface Farms, he's grown something like 14 inches of topsoil. To put that in perspective, if you were to just leave a field alone for 100 years and just let it compost on itself, it might grow an inch of topsoil. It might not. It might just fall apart. This method, we're using animals on land to generate goodness for everything, and we're speeding up the process. I watched one the other night where people in New Zealand were using goats to defeat blackberry patches that had grown up and were choking the forest. And the berries will actually, the vines will grow up trees, and they act like kindling when it gets dry in a fire. So it actually run the fire right up the tree and encourage burning of the crowns of the trees and the destruction of the entire forest. But just by grazing goats on it rotationally, no problem. And like, it's so effective that like the first year you do it, the blackberries come back pretty strong the second year, but not as strong. So the first year it takes like a month per acre. Second year it takes like 2 weeks per acre. Third year it's like a week per acre. Fourth year it's like a couple days. And the growth you're getting, the native growth of the other plants that should be there, is making a comeback because those plants can now compete. So it's stacked systems. So you don't have to worry about, you know, your animals getting sick. They always have fresh food. And the only other trick to this is good, clean water. You know, Greg Judy does all these videos. We're going to get to go study with him, where he talks about, you know, having good, clean water and how you get it. And then I watch these other people who are like, you know, why don't I farm like Greg Judy? And the guy's like, well, I can't afford the watering can. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, Judy's pretty creative. Like, he uses giant tractor tires. He gets them used, bolt them to the ground. He does all these setups where you can just fill it up with water and you're good to go. And this guy instead was trucking in like hundreds of pounds of grain every day on a field where he's got perfectly good grass and he's not feeding it because he doesn't understand rotational grazing. And the other thing to this is that the grass evolved to deal with this kind of pressure. So what will happen is, if you don't let an animal sit there and just chomp away on shit all day long, sorry the language, and you let the grasses come to the, like, how do I do this? Let's say I had a piece of grass. You want to see a demonstration? This is going to make you nervous. Let's say I had a piece of grass like this, right? And it's got a nice point on it. And the animal comes and eats it, and then it's kind of like that. And if you just wait until it does that again, problem solved. It's not even rocket science. And that's the determining factor in how you graze animals on grass. Use electric fence to keep them in. And the funny thing is they're so happy because they're eating so well that you don't really deal with aggressive animals. And you cull the ones that are aggressive because you don't need that around you. I watched this man, Judy, like wander up to these, like his cows and bulls. He likes them under like 1,000 or under. Like you don't want a big animal. Fine, as he says, bones on them like a deer. Really fine bones, great big gut, big rumen for processing, you know, forage. And they're peaceful animals. And he can walk right up to these bulls in the middle of the field. I actually watched one day, he wanted one to move, and he put his foot on it and kind of pushed him, and the bull just got out of the way. And I'm like, that was a like 900-pound bull you just pushed. I wouldn't try that with any of the cattle I've been around. But, you know, you select for the right things. And the funny thing is because the animals aren't stressed, and the animals move on new food every day, they perform really well. As Judy talks about performance all the time. It's how your animal performs. So when we're thinking about our farm, we want this. We want this. We want this. But all of this starts here. Without this is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And I've had friends of mine go, you know, you talk about this a lot. You're going to give people ideas, and they're going to go out and they're going to buy the farms, and you're not going to be able to get one. I'm like, that would break my heart, but that would also solve the problem, wouldn't it? Like, you know, I've tried to explain this to people. You try to explain, like, do you have any idea how well you can do with this system? They're like, oh, let me know when you get it up and running. I'm like, no, you're not getting it. You really aren't. And the brilliant thing about this, and I hope that, I think minorities need to do this. Everybody needs to do this. The way you pass on wealth is land, and owning your own home. With that type of agricultural system, you could pay for a home. You can actually do really well, and you can raise really healthy food, and you can share that food with others. You know, you're selling it, you're trading it, whatever. But you're producing something that is recession proof. It's food. And every time you graze animals on this, you're making this pasture that much better. You know, in the future, there will be smart people who will look at this and they go, you know what? I'm into real estate and I want to sell houses, but I've got houses that are like 5 to 10 acres or even 2 acres and the yard looks terrible. I could spend thousands of dollars to have a bunch of people come in and rip this stuff out, and next year it's just going to grow again, or they have to use chemicals. Those people are smart. They're going to hire people like me who run animals. And we're going to come in and we're going to run animals on their land, you know, and it's going to be much cheaper for them, and we're going to be able to feed our animals, and the land is going to do better. And it's a balance. It's a delicate balance. You can't just stick an animal on land and let them have at it. When we have our farm, we got to look for endangered species. We got to look for all these things. But in Massachusetts, I know in other places, but in Massachusetts, we're losing all of our fields. We don't have fields anymore. And there are so many species that need a field to reproduce. They need a field to live. Well, what if we could produce a good natural field for them to be? And bees are another part of it. You want to save the bees. You know, there are trees that bees will pollinate, and they do well with trees, but they do even better with this type of stuff. And last but not least, let me go back to the trees. One point in time, these giants, these magnificent, beautiful creatures, beings, were the landscape. And alas, the history of Massachusetts and the Northeast is that the trees were cut. And everything in the 1800s in Massachusetts, you're probably lucky if you found a tree. It was all field. And now we're letting it regrow. And look at how choked it is. There's too much. If we want to fix things, it's balance. You have to cut down some of these and let the earth breathe. Grow the earth. Let some of these trees become old growth. Big, giant, beautiful trees. Use the trees. But once the trees are done growing, they don't capture much carbon. And they don't capture as much carbon as this does. This captures way more carbon. There's way more biodiversity in this. But it's a balance of all these things. And the reason why you would have mist is because this environment, with all its green and its biodiversity, and its tall and short growth, its many edges, as we would say, with all this life, will start to generate, this is a fact, this is scientific, will start to generate its own weather. If you do enough of this, it does it micro no matter what. If you get down in the soil, it's actually a different weather pattern than what you're seeing above. Hot, dry days for weeks and weeks and weeks. You go on Greg Judy's farm out in Missouri and part that grass, and it's cool in the bottom. And some of this grass, like he talks about eastern gamma grass, which is like the ice cream of grass for cows. That's like if you put out a field of bacon and ice cream for me. And the roots of this grass can go down more than 13 feet. So it doesn't die out in a drought. It does just fine. This modern crappy grass, that monocrop grass that we stick in everyone's yard, doesn't perform well because we've done the wrong thing. The answer's right in front of us. And that's one of the reasons I got into this. It's because I believe in this so much, and I want to share it with you. And everything they do with their type of agriculture is exactly the opposite, I think, of what you would think. So like Judy builds, Joel Salatin does this, a lot of people do, they build rabbitats. Greg Judy actually calls them rabbitats. It's a habitat for wild rabbits. And he does hunt and eat them occasionally, but his whole theory, and Alan Savory's theory, is if you have enough food, it's not less, it's more. Don't get rid of food. Create abundance. So if you have, if you have rabbits on your property, all around the edges, you get tons of rabbit, and they're like literally it's a piece of metal, or I'm sure you could use other stuff, propped up so there's no space about that big, wide, it's dry, it's rabbits like, and they cover it with sticks and brush to the point where nothing can dig it out. And they put them like 20 yards apart. So the rabbits have enough room to run from place to place and keep breeding. And you get other small rodents and whatnot too. Isn't that bad for your farm? Bear with me. And because they do this, the coyotes, and other than the fact that he has sheepdogs that protect the sheep, the coyotes don't bother the animals because they have so many that they can go after. It's not worth it to them to try and go onto a farm and mess with anything there. they'll just stay on the outskirts and they'll go after the rabbits there. And the rabbits eat the excess bramble that would encroach upon the farm. So he doesn't have to keep bringing certain species out there if he doesn't want to run goats out there. He just have regular rabbits do their thing. It's like a beautiful dance. It's really kind of cool. So that's what we are looking at here. We've got different grasses, all these different grasses. And we've got different plants, you know, we've got thistle, we've got, you know, Queen Anne's lace, we've got, you know, Timothy hay, we've got other wild grasses here, you know. And each one of them represents a different layer of the biome. So some grass is real short, grows really well in cool weather, doesn't do well in hot weather. Fantastically enough, if that's on your acreage, in March, that grass is growing, and that can feed animals. Well, the Timothy's not yet going in that direction. It takes a little bit more time to get going. And the Queen Anne's lace isn't ready to eat yet. It's not nutritional enough yet. And by the time you're moving animals to an area that has really good grass, in summer, maybe you're around the gamma, maybe you're around the Timothy, you know, these other, I don't know the names of all the grasses. I'm not Greg Judy. And so that time of the year, those are the grasses that are providing the food. And instead of having very short grass and you mow your lawn constantly, that grass is nutritionally deficient. That's very weak. The plant is exhausting all of its sugar reserves in the roots just to produce the fiber to put that together. But you let that grass go and you get it up to just before it's going to seed, that's like, it's really good. It's a lot of nutritional density. You feed that to an animal, the animal does really well. But the animal can't eat all of it. So he puts them out in the field, and what happens is they eat about a third if you do it right. At least this is what he says. They eat a third, they trample a third, they leave a third. So some of the seed heads go into the soil. Some of the seed heads get eaten. Some of the plants get trampled. Some of it gets defecated or urinated on. Some of it gets left alone, and it goes full seed. And now you have something that replenishes itself. It's kind of the point. I don't know, when I saw that, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. All my life, I wanted a farm. All my life. And all my life, when I thought about a farm, I would say, you know, I can't afford it. Like, how would you make money farming? Because I certainly don't want to grow vegetables. I'm not a fan. I don't really eat them. And everybody I've ever seen who grows vegetables, that's backbreaking work to get those harvested and get them to market in the right time. And even if you get them up there, your appeal could be lost. You're hedging your bets on a crop that is, a lot of time it's a monocrop. Like, you're not growing something diverse, you know, like, I'd like corn. Like, well, how many different types of corn are you growing? Oh, just one. Yeah, that's not biodiverse. That's not good for your soil either. And instead of, you know, instead of leaving some of it, nope, you're going to plow that field up. You're going to let a lot of the rain wash the topsoil into a gully. And then next year you're going to plant the same crop on it. And what's going to happen? It's going to deplete the soil more. I watched a gentleman out of Vermont. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. Blew my mind. And this guy runs a flower farm in Vermont. So it's not like big money crop, and he does okay, but it's Vermont, so it's not like a lot of money. He ships them out, but, you know, compared to other places, he's not breaking in dough. People in Vermont don't have a lot of money. The government takes too much of it, and it leaves people relatively impoverished. So farming being a practice that doesn't have a lot of money to begin with, this guy started thinking about they might have to sell their farm. You know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I'd like to make more money, but I don't know how. And he saw these systems at work, and he decided to try this out. So he goes into town, and he found 18 restaurants who would give him their food scraps. So, okay, I got food scraps. Then he goes and he gets wood chips. A lot of towns, At least they used to just want to get rid of wood chips. They didn't want their wood chips. Take our wood chips, please. So he took a bunch of wood chips, and he had these carports, like tractor trailer ports, huge. And he was saying like he used them originally, I guess, something to do with trucks and flowers, but he hadn't used them in a while. They were just sitting there taking up space. And so he takes the wood chips and he lays out a thing of wood chips. Then a layer of food, layer of wood chips, layer of food, layer of wood chips, layer of food, until he's got a mountain. And he's showing this to this dude who's interviewing him. And he goes, then I put 1,000 meat birds on this, 1,000 of them. And they'd hammer that for 2 months. And I'd supplement their feed, but mostly they just eat that, you know. And if you know anything about chickens, they'll eat all sorts of interesting things. They really enjoy that. So he puts the chickens on there, and the chickens knock it down. Like, the chickens really rock and roll that stuff. And once that's done, he pulls that material out, loads it up again, and he was raising about 1,000 meat birds per truck port, and I think he had 2 or 3 of them in 8 weeks. So I'll do the math for you. That is, they're free range, technically considered free range, organic, antibiotic free chicken. They're cage free, completely cage free. They don't ever live in a cage. They get to do whatever chickens want. They get nice fresh water, and they get to pick through things and eat them and have fun being chickens. And you can sell a bird of that quality for, depending on where you are, from between like, I'd say like $28 and like $40 anywhere in the country. So let's say 30 and just keep it even. And the guy said, wow, that's great. You raise chickens on this. And he goes, no, I used to. He's like, what do you mean you used to? And he goes, well, I realized pretty shortly after that if I could raise 1,000 meat birds, I could actually raise even more egg layers. And he's like, you know, a meat bird's a one-time thing. Like, you harvest a meat bird and that's it. But if I did egg layers, 1,000 egg layers on one compost pit, because they're going to produce about 700 eggs a day, which is insane. And those are free-range, antibiotic, really cage-free, like not some of these companies who lie about it, like literally cage-free birds. And that's not a cheap thing. And he's doing it for almost nothing. And he's capturing carbon. He's making the environment better doing this. And the guy goes, that's insane. Like, I can't even get my brain around how much money that is. And he goes, yeah. He goes, so that's what you do now? And the guy goes, nope, I don't. He goes, when a bird stops laying, as long as they do their job well, they stay until they're pretty much too old to do it. Because the older ones teach the younger ones how it works. And he goes, they're way more valuable to show the younger birds how to do this so that they are more effective. So I don't harvest them anymore, really. I harvest them for my, and we sell them, but it's not like the main source of income. Usually they just eat it at the farm. Because we still sell eggs, but it's not a main source of income. And the guy goes, I don't understand what your business is. And he goes, I'll show you. So he brings this guy out back. And there are piles and piles and piles of the blackest earth you have ever seen in your life. Like, it's midnight black. It's beautiful. It's got an insane bioprofile to it. Like, the health of this material is insane. And the guy goes, what is this? And he goes, I create the highest end potting soil in the northeastern United States. Like, this stuff is no joke. It is not funny how expensive this is, and it's really good. And he goes, I make so much of this that I actually, what you're standing on here, which goes out like 100 yards and is like X amount of yards wide and like 30 yards deep, he goes, this whole thing is built on that. He goes, I got earthworms down at 30 feet. The guy goes, I've never heard of that. And he goes, me neither. He goes, there they are, though. And so that's what he does. The point is that he's capturing carbon, he's making food, and he's generating soil. And he's doing it on less than 4 acres. Oh, did I mention how much it costs to do it? Do the math in your head. Here's the thing though, and this is where my brain goes. And I listen to people like Savory when he says, what do you want out of the soil? What do you want out of your farm? Because whatever you want, whatever you work for, that's what you'll generate. And that usually means that the people who see dollar signs in their head, that's the first thing they go to, is they go, oh, look at how much money we can make. And I'm not gonna lie, that certainly sits in my mind. But what sits in my mind more than that is how much good you could do. And that's what I want to do. Someday, I want to tattoo people in like a yurt, in a field like this. I want to take people out of their stressful environment, and I want them to sit in nature, get tattooed, experience this, and experience nature the way it's supposed to be. I have every intention of putting this idea into your head like a virus. A virus that has everything to do with truth and healing and understanding. And hopefully others will mimic this. And there will come a day, and maybe it's lofty thinking, but I think you should dream big when it comes to health in the world. There'll be a day when everyone does this type of stuff. And when people go like, well, how are you going to make money? When have you ever known people not needing to eat? And how many layers of systems can I do on top of this? When we do our farm, you know, with people like our friends Melissa and Nathan, we'll have a place where we can feed people and have them experience this. We can do venues. When I do weddings, I perform, 6 weddings on average every year. As a minister, I've been a minister for decades. I'd rather do it here. If you're going to hold ritual, if you're going to do education, you want to teach children or adults about this, you need a place like this. I want this to be so plentiful that they're everywhere. And it's just common knowledge. That's why I do this. And the reason I do it is because if I do it that way, then I have your attention for a little bit and you can see it. And I get you to think and to dream. It's the most important thing. Once we have this, you solve a lot of your problems, believe it or not. I know you know this, but I'll spell it out. If human beings breathe fresh air and eat good food and drink clean water and have harmonious relationships with other beings, then those human beings are very likely going to be much happier and healthier. And they're not fighting for resources, which is one of our biggest problems. We fight over resources, and that's pretty much it. Instead, we grow systems based on growth. And then we stack systems. They could be systems that are independent contractor based, 1099. You want to do weddings at a place like this? That's your job. You want to do custom flowers? Great. You want to make medicinal plants? Great. You want to make tinctures or dried herbs or anything. The list is almost endless because the base is what we're growing. How would you do it? Like I said, the different animals, the different environments, in order to make these things work. And I don't need to wait until we have a farm. If you have land and you're watching this and you're in my area and you want some help, I don't know everything, but I'm learning. And I'm committing this to memory with the intention of helping others. And if you want help, you let me know, because I'd love to help. In fact, if I was to be totally honest, as a person who has been through some stuff, and those of you who know me know there's unfortunately a lot of PTSD and there's a lot of shit that happened, and sorry, but that's just the way it is. That's speaking honest. That's, speaking truth. When you're, I don't want to go down the list. I don't like labels. I don't need titles. If you know me, you know me. If not, just trust me when I tell you bad things happen. And sometimes they happen in volumes. But if I could if I could do that, if I could help people to understand this, and if I could do it for real, if you gave me the choice of doing this, which makes me happier than I can even tell you, and helping others, and sharing this information and teaching people how to do it, I would give this up for the rest of my life if I had to. It'd break my heart, but I'd be okay with it because I'd be doing good. And as a heathen, I believe very strongly in the idea that you find the resource and you help people get to the resource. You find the foe and you fight the foe. You have a great or difficult adventure, or whatever you want to call it, goal, journey. And that's part of what you're supposed to be doing. When you find something worthy of your match or that exceeds you, then you will exert all your energies into it, and it will eventually kill you. But what you'll have done is create something positive for people. That is a worthy adversary. I like that. I occasionally joke to myself and think that when people go, oh, it's global warming, I said, yeah, you can blame people like me because we whooped the shit out of the ice giants, and that's why this global... I'm kidding. I feel like you could apply that same logic here. You want to battle, you want to fight a bad guy. Save the world. I'm not going to do it. I just stumbled upon something that somebody else did, and I'm using this to share it with you. That's all. But I believe in it. I believe in it with every part of my being and every part of my soul. And I know from my own instinct, from going out and hunting and observing animals in nature and being around them growing up, that when animals are healthy and animals are well and animals are functioning and I'm around them, I am doing better because I am also an animal. We evolved next to these beings. We evolved as part of a system. And now we wander lost through the cities of the world, trying to be content with another gadget or another thing. We want a title, we want a name. There isn't a cow on earth I can think of that gives a shit what color skin you have, what your sexuality is, what gender you identify as, what your religious background is, whether or not you have a college degree, whether or not you have, whether or not you swing in 10 inches of meat. Nobody cares. The cows don't. All the cows want to know is, when do they get their next meal? And are you going to be kind to them? I feel like this writes itself. And that's what I believe. And that's why I do this. I want you to dream. I want you to fantasize. Right now, as I'm talking about these things, I want you to think about where your farm's going to be. I want you to think about what's going to be on your farm. I want you to think about leaving that farm to generations yet born, and all the memories and all the joy they will have with that. I will never have children. I did the thing that I thought I was supposed to do, and I believed in. And believed in then, I believe in it now. My genetics, if I was a cow, I'm getting culled, unfortunately. It's just the way it is. That's just life. But I'm okay with it. Because at some point you have to care about the environment and future generations more than you care about your own unenlightened self-interest. Don't you want to go sit here? I think the dew on this grass and listening to all the different insects and watching them, I feel like that's magic. To sit underneath this sky with this moon on your farm, looking over your fields at night, listening to your animals. I don't know what most people think of as far as heaven. I know they have their ideas about it. And as a heathen, I'm never going to it. But I will tell you this, if I were to pick heaven, This is it. So, as we talked about in our long video, which you can check out, we filled in a lot of the base. We've got a lot of our organic material that's up front that is helping grow our soil, building our soil biome, different native grasses, different native plants. We're not quite done with the underpainting, and again, like I said, I'm not going to jump into the next part of this painting in time for Sunday. But next Sunday, this will be going up for auction. There's still more yet to do. For those of you who don't understand what's going on, this is just the underpainting. In traditional oil painting, this is much more the way we do it. We build up layers and layers and layers, and then on top of this, we put our color. And that's where the saying comes from that tone does the work and color gets the credit, because people think they're looking at the colors. So yes, we'll have this ready, and with this one we are going to do a run of limited edition prints. There will be a special quality to these. These are going to be unique. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys. If you would please, please, please do me a favor. Share this with your friends. Share this with people. Even if it's not really relevant that they ever purchase anything, it's more relevant that they understand what's going on. And I like to share this stuff. And so there we are for this time. And so we're stopping for today. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't even know. I'm having fun, and I'm having fun sharing these ideas with people. So, cool. Peace.